My name is Anita, and at 68 years old, I never expected to be banned from my own family dinner by my daughter-in-law Margaret. After building a restaurant empire from scratch following my husband Frank's death, I kept my success quiet to maintain normalcy with my family. What Margaret never knew was that the exclusive restaurant where she celebrated every family occasion was mine. The look on her face when the staff called me boss was priceless. Before I tell you how my own daughter-in-law tried to erase me from my son's life, let me know where you're watching from today. I'd love to connect with you all. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about family business and finding your power after 60. I grew up in a small Midwestern town called Millfield, where everyone knew your business before you did. My parents ran a small diner that barely kept our family afloat, but it was there I learned the value of good food and honest work. Those early mornings helping my mother prepare biscuits and gravy gave me a foundation I never knew would support an entire empire someday. When I was 23, I scraped together enough money to attend culinary school in Chicago. That first day nervous and out of my element, among students from wealthier backgrounds, I literally bumped into Frank. He was tall, handsome, and apologetic about the coffee he spilled on my only decent blouse. He bought me lunch to make up for it, and we were inseparable from that moment on. Frank and I shared the same dream. We wanted to open a restaurant that served the kind of food that makes you feel like you came home. Not fancy cuisine with tiny portions and unpronounceable names, but hearty, flavorful dishes that reminded people of Sunday dinners with family. We graduated together 45 years ago, got married 1 month later, and spent 5 years working in other people's restaurants to learn the business inside and out. Our first little place was barely bigger than my current kitchen. We called it Hometown Kitchen, and every single item was made from scratch. Frank worked the grill while I handled the baking and front of house. We lived in the tiny apartment above the restaurant, putting every penny back into the business. Those were lean years, but we were building something together, and that made even the hardest days worthwhile. When I found out I was pregnant with Thomas, our only child, we had just started turning a small profit. I worked right up until my water broke, then was back in the restaurant with Thomas in a bassinet next to the cash register when he was 2 weeks old. Our customers loved watching him grow up in that restaurant. He took his first steps between the tables and learned to count by helping stock the napkin dispensers. By the time Thomas was in high school, we had managed to open 2 more locations. Frank had a gift for systems and operations, ensuring each restaurant maintained the same quality and atmosphere. I focused on recipe development and staff training, making sure every plate that came out of our kitchens tasted like it was made with love. Thomas never seemed interested in the restaurant business. He was always drawing buildings and bridges, so it wasn't surprising when he decided to study architecture. We supported his dreams, just as we had pursued our own. He went to university in California, which was difficult for me. Having him so far away felt like missing a limb, but I knew he needed to spread his wings. During his junior year, Thomas called excitedly to tell us about a girl he had met. Margaret was studying business administration and came from what Thomas described as a prestigious family from Connecticut. The way he talked about her, I could tell this was serious. He brought her home for Christmas that year, and I tried my best to make her feel welcome. Margaret was beautiful, polished, and clearly intelligent. She complimented our home, which was modest, despite our growing business success. Frank and I had always been careful not to flaunt our wealth. We lived comfortably, but without ostentation, preferring to reinvest in our employees and expansion. Margaret seemed to appreciate what she called our rustic charm, though something in her tone suggested she found it quaint rather than charming. After Thomas and Margaret graduated, they moved back to the Midwest, settling in a city about an hour from us. Thomas joined a respected architectural firm, and Margaret took a position in marketing at a large corporation. They got married in what Margaret called a small ceremony, though with 300 guests, it was anything but small to me. Her parents spared no expense, and I got my first glimpse of the world Margaret came from. Her father was an investment banker, her mother a former debutante who now chaired multiple charity boards. I worried a little about how Thomas would fit into that world, but he seemed happy. And when they announced they were expecting their first child 2 years later, any concerns I had took a back seat to the joy of becoming a grandmother. Frank never got to meet our grandchildren, Just 3 months before Jason was born, Frank complained of indigestion after dinner. I found him on the kitchen floor an hour later. The heart attack was massive and immediate. The doctors said he probably never knew what hit him. In an instant, my partner of 39 years was gone. I was devastated. For weeks I could barely function. Thomas and Margaret were wonderful during that time. Margaret helped with the funeral arrangements and Thomas temporarily moved back home to help me get my bearings. What they didn't know was that Frank had been preparing to open our 10th location. All the plans were in place, contracts signed, and now I had to decide whether to continue expanding or scale back. In my grief, I found purpose. I threw myself into making sure Frank's vision continued. By the time Jason was born, I had opened the 10th restaurant and was scouting locations for the 11th. When Lily came along 3 years later, we were up to 15 locations across 3 states. During those early years with the grandchildren, Margaret and I got along well enough. She was always polite, if somewhat formal, with me. I tried to respect their space as a young family while still remaining connected. I kept my growing business success relatively quiet, not out of secrecy, but because it had never been our way to boast. Thomas knew we were doing well, but had no idea of the true scope of what was now my company. Looking back, I can see the warning signs of Margaret's controlling nature. When I would offer to babysit so they could have a date night, Margaret would hesitate, saying the children were on a very specific schedule that might be disrupted. When I brought hand-knitted blankets for the babies, she thanked me, but later I noticed they were never used. Small things easy to dismiss as a new mother being particular, but part of a pattern I would only recognize later. As the children grew, I treasured every moment with them. Jason had Frank's gentle nature and curious mind. Lily was fiery and independent, reminding me of myself at that age. I looked forward to our weekly dinners and occasional weekend visits, storing up memories like precious jewels. I never imagined these simple family connections would become a battleground, or that the business I built would become both the weapon used against me and, ultimately, my shield. But life has a way of surprising you, especially when you think you have it all figured out. The changes were so subtle at first that I questioned whether I was imagining things. It began with family traditions gradually shifting to revolve around Margaret's family rather than the ones Frank and I had established. The Christmas cookie baking day that had been our tradition since Thomas was a child was suddenly replaced with a trip to Margaret's parents' ski lodge. When I mentioned it, Margaret smiled tightly and said, "We thought it would be nice for the children to experience a white Christmas in Vermont. Maybe next year we can do cookies." Next year never seemed to come. Then came the forgotten invitations. A Sunday barbecue I only learned about when Thomas posted photos on social media. A trip to the zoo where Lily saw her first elephant. Small moments that accumulated like paper cuts on my heart. When I called Thomas about these exclusions, he always sounded genuinely surprised. "She said she texted you, Mom." "I'm sorry, it must not have gone through." Or, "There was limited space in the car, and Margaret thought you might be uncomfortable with the long drive." His excuses became more elaborate, while remaining just plausible enough that I couldn't call them outright lies. Thomas was increasingly absent, working longer hours, as his architecture firm took on bigger projects. He was designing sustainable office buildings and traveling for consultations, leaving more of the family decisions to Margaret. I understood his ambition and supported his career, but I could see him becoming disconnected from the daily realities of his home life. I tried everything to maintain my connection with the family. I offered to pick the children up from school when Margaret mentioned being overwhelmed with her work schedule. I suggested cooking meals they could freeze for busy weeknights. Each offer was deflected with what seemed like reasonable explanations. Her mother had already arranged to help with school pickup. They were trying a meal delivery service. "Thanks, but we have it covered." The incident that finally opened my eyes happened at Jason's 8th birthday party. Id spent days making his favorite red velvet cupcakes with cream cheese, frosting the same recipe Id used for every birthday since Thomas was little. When I arrived at their house, Margaret greeted me with a tight smile. "Oh, Anita, you shouldn't have gone to so much trouble," she said, taking the container from my hands. "Actually, we ordered a special cake from that bakery downtown." And Jason has some friends with allergies, so we're being very careful about outside food. I watched in silent shock as she carried my cupcakes straight to the trash and dumped them in container and all. She didn't even wait until I had left the room. It was a clear message, and for the first time I saw it for what it was. This wasn't about allergies or special cakes. This was about erasing my contributions from my grandchildren's lives. After that day, I began noticing how Margaret subtly coached the children to prefer her family traditions. When Jason mentioned enjoying fishing with me at the lake, Margaret quickly jumped in to remind him how much more fun he had sailing with her father. When Lily wanted to wear the sweater I had given her, Margaret would suggest something more stylish from her own mother's gifts. The children began to change toward me. Where once they had run into my arms with excitement, they now held back, greeting me with polite but distant hellos. Jason stopped asking me to tell him stories about his dad as a boy. Lily no longer wanted to learn how to bake pies. It was as if a wall was being built between us, one carefully placed brick at a time. Holidays became particularly painful. At Thanksgiving the previous year, Margaret had criticized my pumpkin pie for being too spicy while praising her mother's store-bought version. At Christmas, my gifts for the children were opened last, and with little enthusiasm after the mountain of expensive presents from Margaret's family. What hurt the most was seeing how these manipulations affected my relationship with Thomas. My once affectionate son now seemed uncomfortable in my presence, as if caught between loyalty to his wife and his love for me. Our conversations became superficial, avoiding any topics that might lead to tension. I tried talking to him privately about my concerns. "Thomas, I feel like I'm being pushed out of your lives," I said, during a rare moment alone, when he dropped by to pick up some old photo albums. "Mom, that's ridiculous," he replied, but he couldn't meet my eyes. "Margaret's just particular about things. You know how she is." "Is she particular about all grandparents or just me?" I asked. His silence was answer enough. Margaret also began making comments about my home and lifestyle. She would look around my comfortable but modest house with barely concealed disapproval. "Did you ever think about updating your kitchen, Anita? These cabinets are so 90s. Or, why do you still drive that old car? Surely you and Frank put something away for retirement." Little did she know that I lived modestly by choice, not necessity. After Frank's death, I had channeled my grief into growing our business. What had started as a single restaurant was now a chain of 32 locations across 5 states, with plans for national expansion. I had a talented management team that handled day-to-day operations, but I remained the owner and chief decision-maker, personally visiting each location regularly to maintain quality and connection with staff. My simple lifestyle wasn't from lack of funds, but from a genuine preference for the familiar and a businesswoman's sense that flash rarely equals substance. The truth was, I could have bought and sold Margaret's parents several times over, but that information had never seemed relevant to share. Now I wondered if I had made a mistake in keeping my success so private. The exclusion became more blatant as time went on. Birthday celebrations for the children were scheduled when I had previously mentioned being out of town for business. Family photos were taken without invitations extended to me. Margaret even began planning summer vacations during the weeks I had traditionally taken the grandchildren to my lakeside cabin. What Margaret didn't realize was that each exclusion, while painful, was strengthening my resolve. I had built a business empire from nothing after losing the love of my life. I had faced skeptical banks and dismissive suppliers who didn't believe a widow in her 50s could expand a regional restaurant chain. I had proven them all wrong. I was not about to let my daughter-in-law erase me from my family without a fight. Still, I tried one more time to bridge the gap. I invited them all to dinner at my house, planning to cook Thomas' favorite childhood meals, and perhaps finally share the truth about my business success. I thought if Margaret understood my financial position, she might see me differently. Not that I wanted her respect only for my money, but it might open the door to genuine connection. I called Thomas directly to extend the invitation. He hesitated, then said he'd check with Margaret and get back to me. 3 days later, he texted to say they were too busy with the kids' activities, but would try to find time soon. That evening, as I sat alone in my kitchen looking at the family photos on my refrigerator, I made a decision. No more trying to appease Margaret. No more accepting scraps of time with my family. No more hiding my success to make others comfortable. It was time to stand in my truth and demand the respect I deserved, not just as a grandmother and mother, but as a woman who had built something substantial in this world. I just needed the right opportunity to reset the balance, and I had a feeling it would present itself soon enough. For 20 years, Thanksgiving had been held at my house. Even after Frank passed, I maintained the tradition, cooking his famous cornbread stuffing and deep-fried turkey while Thomas and Margaret brought side dishes. It was the one holiday that seemed sacred, untouchable by the gradual family erosion. So when Margaret called in early November to discuss holiday plans, I was already mentally planning my grocery list and considering which wines to serve. "Actually, Anita, we're going to try something different this year," Margaret said, her voice carrying that false brightness I had come to recognize as a warning sign. "We've made reservations at Riverside Kitchen for Thanksgiving dinner. It's that new place downtown that's gotten such wonderful reviews. My parents will be joining us, of course." I felt like I'd been slapped. Riverside Kitchen was the newest location in my restaurant chain, opened just 3 months earlier. The irony of being uninvited from my own Thanksgiving table only to have them celebrate at my restaurant was almost too much to bear. "I would have happily hosted everyone here as usual," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You know how much I enjoy cooking for the family." "Oh, we know," Margaret replied, "but you deserve a break, and this way no one has to clean up. It's a win-win." I could have told her then. I could have said, "Margaret, Riverside Kitchen is my restaurant. I'm not just the owner of that location, but the entire hometown kitchen chain, including Riverside. The executive chef personally sends me taste tests of every seasonal menu item before it goes public." But something held me back. Perhaps it was pride, or maybe I was simply tired of trying to prove my worth to someone determined to think little of me. "At least let me help with the arrangements," I offered. "I know the manager there. I could make sure you get the best table." "That won't be necessary," Margaret said quickly. "I have it all handled." I wondered if she thought I was lying about knowing the manager, or if she was simply determined to exclude me from every aspect of planning. Either way, it stung. We ended the call with vague plans for me to join them at the restaurant, and I spent the next few weeks trying to convince myself that it might be nice to enjoy Thanksgiving without cooking for once. I even called James, the manager at Riverside, to ensure their reservation would be perfect, though I didn't mention my connection to the family. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office when my phone chimed with a text from Margaret, just confirming final numbers for Thursday. Unfortunately, the restaurant called, and they had a mistake in their booking. They've had to downsize our table, and we're at capacity with both sets of grandparents and Thomas' sister's family coming in from Colorado. So sorry. Well, plan something with you for Christmas instead. I stared at the phone in disbelief. Both sets of grandparents clearly meant her parents were still invited. Only I was being cut from the table. And Thomas' sister, he was an only child. This wasn't even a good lie. I called Thomas immediately, but the call went to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back as soon as possible. An hour later, I received a text, "Sorry, Mom, in meetings all day." Margaret told me about the restaurant mix-up. "Really disappointing. We'll call tomorrow." But he didn't call tomorrow, or the next day. Thanksgiving morning arrived, and I found myself alone for the first time since Frank died. I had declined invitations from friends, believing I would be with my family. Now I had nowhere to go. I wish I could say I handled it with grace and dignity. The truth is, I spent the morning crying while looking through old photo albums. Pictures of Thomas as a baby Frank carving turkeys at holidays past the 4 of us at the grandchildren's christenings. A family history that was being systematically erased. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Thomas finally calling. "Mom, I'm so sorry about the mix-up," he began, his voice rushed and low as if he was calling from somewhere he didn't want to be overheard. "We should have made sure there was room for everyone." The truth is, I couldn't bear to tell him I knew he was lying. That I had checked with the restaurant and there had been no booking error. That I knew Margaret had planned all along to exclude me and had made up a story to make it seem like an unfortunate circumstance rather than a deliberate choice. Instead, I said, "It's okay, Thomas. I understand these things happen. I was just looking forward to seeing the grandchildren." "Well, definitely make it up to you," he promised. "Margaret was thinking maybe you could come over tomorrow for leftovers." Leftovers. Like scraps thrown to a dog after the family feast. I had never felt so humiliated. After we hung up, I made myself a sandwich I couldn't taste and opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion. Special occasions seemed increasingly unlikely in my future. Out of a masochistic impulse I didn't quite understand, I opened Instagram to see if anyone had posted photos of their Thanksgiving celebrations yet. There it was in Margaret's stories posted just 20 minutes earlier, a beautiful table at Riverside Kitchen, not just with her parents but with what appeared to be her entire extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, at least 20 people, at a table that had supposedly been downsized due to booking errors. The caption read, "So grateful for family time with everyone who matters most." Everyone who matters most. The words burned into my brain like a brand. I closed the app and poured another glass of wine, larger this time. The house felt cavernous around me, full of memories but empty of voices. I thought about calling one of my friends, but I couldn't bear to explain what had happened, to say out loud that my own son had abandoned me on Thanksgiving for the comfort of his wife's approval. As the day wore on, my sadness calcified into something harder: determination, resolve. I had spent years trying to accommodate Margaret to be the perfect mother-in-law who never interfered, never criticized, never demanded attention or recognition. Where had it gotten me? Alone on Thanksgiving with a sandwich and a bottle of wine, while my family celebrated without me at my own restaurant. Christmas was coming, and I had little doubt that Margaret would find some reason why I couldn't be included in those plans either. A sudden ski trip to Vermont, perhaps. Or a cruise that just happened to be booked during the holidays. As I sat there in my quiet house, I made a decision. I would no longer be a doormat for Margaret to wipe her feet on. I would no longer pretend that her treatment of me was acceptable, or that Thomas' lack of backbone was excusable. I had built a business empire that would be the envy of many, including Margaret if she knew. I had earned respect in my industry and from my employees. It was time I demanded it from my family as well. I didn't yet know how or when the opportunity would present itself, but I knew with absolute certainty that things were about to change. Margaret had pushed me to my breaking point, and she was about to discover that this 68-year-old grandmother was not as powerless as she believed. I built Hometown Kitchen into what it is today through a combination of good food, good business sense, and good people. After Frank died, I had two choices: sell the business and retire, or honor his memory by continuing what we started together. The decision was easy, even if the execution was hard. Our original concept of hearty homestyle cooking, made with quality ingredients at reasonable prices, had proven successful in our first 10 locations. I saw no reason to change the fundamentals, but I did bring in a talented executive chef to help standardize and occasionally refresh our menu while maintaining its essential character. What many people don't realize about the restaurant business is that expansion isn't just about having enough money. It's about systems, supply chains, quality control, and perhaps most importantly, people. I invested heavily in management training, promoting from within whenever possible. Many of our location managers had started as servers or line cooks, working their way up as they learned the business. This approach created incredible loyalty among our staff. They weren't just employees, they were part of the Hometown Kitchen family. I knew the names of their spouses and children. I attended their weddings and sent gifts when they had babies. In return, they treated the restaurants as if they were their own, maintaining our standards, even when I wasn't there to oversee things. As we expanded beyond our initial region, I made a conscious decision to keep a low profile personally. The restaurants were becoming well known, but I preferred to stay in the background. I didn't do press interviews or put my name on the door. It wasn't modesty so much as practicality. I could visit locations more effectively if I wasn't immediately recognized as the owner. That isn't to say I was anonymous within the company. Every employee knew who I was, from the executive team to the newest dishwasher. I made a point of visiting each location regularly, working alongside staff during busy shifts, and getting to know everyone personally. They called me boss with affection, and I took pride in the fact that our turnover rate was well below industry average. By the time of the Thanksgiving incident, Hometown Kitchen had grown to 32 locations across 5 states, with Riverside Kitchen being our newest and most upscale iteration of the concept. We had maintained our core values and menu items, but elevated the ambiance and added some more sophisticated options to appeal to a broader clientele. I was in my office at headquarters the Monday after Thanksgiving, still nursing the emotional wounds of being excluded from the family dinner when my phone rang. It was James, the manager at Riverside. "Miss Simmons, I thought you might want to know that we just received a reservation request for a large party next Saturday evening." The name caught my attention. "It's for a Mr. and Mrs. Peterson. Isn't that your son-in-law's family?" I sat up straighter in my chair. "Margaret's parents. Yes. What's the occasion?" "40th wedding anniversary," James said. "The reservation is for 20 people at 7 o'clock. Your son and his wife are hosting." I felt a familiar pang. Another family celebration I probably wouldn't be invited to, but then a thought occurred to me that made me sit very still. "Thank you for letting me know, James," I said finally. "Please make sure they get excellent service, the best table in the house." "Of course," he replied. "Will you be joining them?" "That's the question, isn't it?" I said, more to myself than to him. After we hung up, I sat contemplating my options. I could ignore the event entirely, spending another evening alone, while my family celebrated without me. I could call Thomas and ask directly if I was invited, putting him in the uncomfortable position of either lying to me or confronting Margaret. Or I could simply show up at my own restaurant and let the chips fall where they may. None of these options felt quite right. I wanted something more. Inconsequential. After years of small humiliations and gradual exclusion, I wanted Margaret to understand exactly who she had been dismissing. I called my oldest friend Patricia, who had known me since before Frank and had watched the situation with Margaret unfold over the years. "It's time they knew," Patricia said after I explained the situation. "You've kept your success quiet out of modesty, but Margaret has taken advantage of what she perceives as your powerlessness. Thomas too, for that matter." "But I don't want their respect just because I'm successful," I argued. "I want them to value me as family, as the children's grandmother." "Honey," Patricia said with the bluntness of a 50-year friendship, "they should value you for both. Your success is part of who you are, part of what you built after losing Frank. You've hidden it as if it's something to be ashamed of, when it's actually something to be proud of. Let them see the whole you, and then decide if they still want to treat you like an afterthought." She was right. I had compartmentalized my life, keeping my business success separate from my family relationships. Perhaps that had been a mistake. Perhaps it was time for the worlds to collide. I spent the next few days considering how to approach the situation. I didn't want a public scene that would embarrass everyone, including me. But I did want clarity, and yes, a bit of overdue recognition. Thursday evening, my phone dinged with a text from Thomas' mom, Margaret's. "Parents are celebrating their anniversary Saturday night at Riverside Kitchen. Margaret says she already talked to you about it." Another lie. Margaret hadn't said a word to me about the event. I typed carefully, "No, she hasn't mentioned it. Is this an invitation?" There was a long pause before his reply. "Of course you're invited. 7 o'clock. Sorry for the confusion." I knew without a doubt that Margaret had not intended to include me and was now backed into a corner. Thomas must have asked her directly if I'd been invited, perhaps even insisting that I should be. This wasn't a genuine inclusion, but a reluctant concession. Under normal circumstances, I might have declined, unwilling to go where I wasn't truly wanted. But these were not normal circumstances. These were strategic ones. I called James at Riverside again. "James, about Saturday night. The Peterson anniversary party. I'm going to be there, but I have a special request." I explained what I wanted: no special treatment. When I arrived, no announcement of my presence, nothing to indicate my connection to the restaurant until the natural course of the evening revealed it. "James, who had witnessed Margaret's demanding behavior during her previous visits, was more than happy to comply. Friday night I could barely sleep, alternating between anticipation and anxiety. Was I doing the right thing? Would this help heal my family, or drive an even bigger wedge between us? Was I being petty or standing up for myself? By Saturday morning I had made peace with my decision. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. Margaret had created a false narrative about who I was, and that narrative had affected my relationship with my son and grandchildren. It was time to correct the record. I spent extra time getting ready that evening, choosing a simple but elegant black dress that I had worn to the opening of our 25th location. I kept my jewelry minimal, but chose the diamond earrings Frank had given me for our 30th anniversary. My hair, silver now but still thick, was styled in a classic bob. I wanted to look my best, not just for the anticipated confrontation, but for myself. I arrived at Riverside Kitchen 30 minutes early. The hostess knew enough that she didn't recognize me, directed me to the bar to wait for the rest of my party. James spotted me from across the room and gave me a subtle nod, but made no move to approach. We had agreed he would treat me like any other guest, until the moment was right. I ordered a glass of our house special Cabernet, a wine I had personally selected for the menu, and settled in to wait. As I sipped, I watched the restaurant operate with the smooth efficiency that was our hallmark. Servers moved between tables with practiced grace. The exposed kitchen provided glimpses of chefs working in coordinated harmony. The background music was at just the right volume to allow conversation without shouting. Pride welled up in me. This was what Frank and I had dreamed of, what I had built into reality after he was gone. Why had I ever kept this accomplishment separate from my identity as a mother and grandmother? It was as much a part of me as my love for my family. At precisely 6:50, the door opened, and Margaret's parents entered, followed by a stream of relatives. Thomas and Margaret came next, with Jason and Lily trailing behind them. The children looked bored, already dressed in formal clothes they clearly found uncomfortable. I took a deep breath, finished my wine, and prepared to step into a new chapter of my family story. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back. I waited until the entire party was seated before making my approach. The hostess had given them our best table, a semi-private area, with a view of both the river and the open kitchen. Margaret sat at the center, already holding court and directing the seating arrangements. Thomas was speaking with the server, likely ordering drinks. The children were fidgeting with their cloth napkins, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. As I walked toward the table, Lily spotted me first. "Grandma," she exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. She jumped up from her seat and ran to hug me, a spontaneous show of affection that warmed my heart. Whatever walls Margaret had tried to build, they hadn't completely destroyed my connection with my granddaughter. Thomas looked up, surprise, and something like guilt crossing his face. "Mom, you're here." He came over to kiss my cheek, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Margaret turned slowly, her smile fixed and brittle. "Anita," she said, her tone suggesting I was both unexpected and unwelcome despite the texted invitation. "We were just getting settled." She gestured vaguely toward the far end of the table, where there was indeed an empty chair isolated from the rest of the family. I was about to respond when Jason ran over to join his sister. "Grandma, did you know they make the best milkshakes here?" Dad said. "I can have one, even though it's a fancy dinner." "Is that right?" I smiled at him. "The cookies and cream is my personal favorite." Before Margaret could intervene, one of the servers approached our little group. Her name was Tina, and she had been with Hometown Kitchen for nearly 8 years, starting at our original location and moving to Riverside when it opened. "Miss Simmons," she exclaimed with genuine warmth. "We didn't know you were joining us tonight." She looked at the table arrangement with a slight frown. "This won't do at all. Let me rearrange things." Margaret stood up abruptly. "Excuse me," she said to Tina, her voice carrying that edge of superiority she used with service staff. "We've already arranged the seating. My mother-in-law can sit at the end there." Tina looked from Margaret to me, confusion evident on her face. Before she could say anything that would reveal my position prematurely, I gave her a subtle shake of my head. "Of course," I said smoothly. "The end is fine." Margaret's mother, elegant woman named Diana, who had always been polite if somewhat distant with me, spoke up. Nonsense, she said. Anita should sit here next to me. We haven't had a chance to catch up in ages. It was a small act of kindness that I appreciated, especially given what was about to unfold. I settled into the offered chair, which happened to be directly across from Margaret. Her displeasure was evident in the tight set of her mouth, but in front of her parents and extended family, she could hardly object. The dinner began with drink orders. When the server came to me, I smiled and said, "The house Cabernet, please." I enjoyed it at the bar while waiting. The man on my left, Margaret's uncle from Boston, struck up a conversation about the restaurant. "Have you been here before?" "It's my first time, but Margaret raves about it. Apparently it's part of some chain, but you certainly wouldn't know it from the quality." "I've been here a few times," I replied truthfully. They maintain excellent standards across all their locations. As we chatted, I could see Margaret watching us with narrow eyes, clearly trying to monitor what I might be saying about her. Her concern was interrupted when James, the manager, approached the table with a bottle of champagne. "Compliments of the house, for your anniversary celebration," he said to Margaret's parents with a professional smile. Then he turned to me, and I knew the moment had arrived. "Miss Simmons, I didn't realize you would be joining this party. Is everything to your satisfaction so far?" Before I could answer, Margaret cut in. "You know my mother-in-law." James looked momentarily confused. "Of course, Miss Simmons is our—" I nodded slightly, giving him permission to continue. "Miss Simmons is the owner," he said, "of Riverside Kitchen and the entire Hometown Kitchen restaurant group." The table fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, expressions ranging from surprise to confusion to, in Margaret's case, dawning horror. Thomas was the first to speak. "Mom, what is he talking about?" I took a sip of my water, using the moment to gather my thoughts. After Frank died, I had a choice to make. I could sell the restaurants, or continue building what we started together. I chose to honor his memory by growing the business. Hometown Kitchen now has 32 locations in 5 states with plans for national expansion next year. Margaret's father leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Thomas told us you and your late husband had a small restaurant business, but he never mentioned anything of this scale." I looked directly at Thomas, whose face had gone pale. "I don't discuss business much at family gatherings. It's always seemed more important to focus on the children and catching up on everyone's lives." "But you're the owner," Margaret repeated, her voice higher than normal, "of this restaurant, where we have all our celebrations." "Yes," I said simply. "Riverside Kitchen is our newest location. I'm particularly proud of what we've accomplished here." As if on cue, the executive chef appeared at our table. I had texted him from the bar earlier, asking him to stop by during service. He was a talented young man named Anthony, who had worked his way up through our kitchens over the past decade. "Boss," he said warmly, coming to stand beside my chair, "I didn't know you were coming in tonight." He turned to the table with a professional smile. "The Simmons family gets our very best. Miss Simmons taught me everything I know about running a kitchen that delivers both quality and consistency." Margaret's face had transformed from horror to something closer to panic. The carefully constructed narrative she had built about me, the modest mother-in-law of limited means and influence, was crumbling before her eyes and in front of her entire family. Lily, always quick to grasp situations, looked at me with wide eyes. "You're the boss of this whole restaurant, Grandma, and all the others too." "I am, sweetheart," I confirmed. "Your grandfather and I started with just one small place before your dad was born. After Grandpa died, I kept building the business. Someday, if you're interested, I'll show you how it all works." Margaret's mother was looking at me with new appreciation. "This is remarkable, Anita. Why have you kept this success so quiet all these years?" "It's just never seemed important to talk about," I said. Though in retrospect, perhaps I should have been more open about it. Throughout the exchange, more staff had come by the table, each greeting me with genuine respect and affection. Lisa from accounting, who happened to be dining there that night. Marco, the bar manager who had served me earlier. Each interaction reinforced the reality of my position to the increasingly uncomfortable Margaret. Thomas looked shell-shocked, as if trying to reconcile this new information with his understanding of his mother. "Mom," he said. "Finally, I had no idea it had grown to this extent. Why didn't you tell me?" I held his gaze steadily. "There never seemed to be the right moment, Thomas. And after a while it began to feel like something that might change how people saw me. I wanted to be valued for who I am, not what I own." The unspoken message hung between us. I had wanted my son and his family to love and respect me as a mother and grandmother, not as a successful business owner. That they had failed to do even that made the revelation of my success all the more pointed. Margaret's uncle broke the uncomfortable silence. "Well, this calls for a toast." He raised his champagne glass. "To Anita, who has clearly built something remarkable while remaining so humble about her achievements." The others joined in glasses raised, while Margaret sat frozen, her champagne untouched. Thomas lifted his glass mechanically, his eyes never leaving my face. As the dinner progressed, the dynamic at the table had shifted dramatically. Margaret's parents engaged me in conversation about business strategies and growth plans. Her cousins asked thoughtful questions about the restaurant industry. The children, picking up on the adults' reactions, looked at me with new interest and perhaps a bit of pride. Margaret remained largely silent, picking at her food and occasionally whispering to Thomas, who seemed equally at a loss for words. The power balance had shifted, and neither of them quite knew how to respond. Toward the end of the meal, as desserts were being served, Margaret's father addressed me directly. "Anita, I must say, I'm impressed, not just with your business success but with your discretion. Many people would have flaunted such achievements." "I appreciate that," I said. "Frank and I always believed that actions speak louder than words. The restaurants should stand on their own merits, not on my personal story." "Still," he persisted, "you must be quite comfortable financially." He glanced at his daughter, then back to me. "Margaret was under the impression that you were living quite modestly out of necessity." "I chose to live simply because that's what feels right to me," I replied. "My home is filled with memories of Frank and Thomas growing up. I have everything I need." The implication was clear. Margaret had misjudged not just my financial situation, but my character. Her parents were now reassessing their daughter's behavior toward me in light of this new information. As the evening drew to a close, I could see Margaret struggling to maintain her composure. Her carefully constructed world, where she controlled the family narrative and my place within it, had been upended. The staff continued to treat me with deference, coming to me, rather than her with questions about the party, calling me boss with obvious respect. When the bill arrived, James brought it directly to me. "On the house tonight, boss," he said. "For family." Margaret reached for the leather folder. "We couldn't possibly," she began, but James had already withdrawn it. "Miss Simmons insists on paying for her restaurants," he explained. "It's a matter of principle." "Not tonight," I said firmly. "This is a celebration of Diana's and David's anniversary. The meal is my gift to them." The final blow to Margaret's authority came as we were preparing to leave. Anthony, the executive chef, emerged from the kitchen again with a small box. "For the kids," he said, handing it to Jason and Lily. "The recipe for our famous cookies and cream milkshake that your grandmother helped develop. Maybe she can show you how to make it sometime." The children looked at me with new eyes, suddenly seeing their grandmother, not as the peripheral figure Margaret had positioned me to be, but as someone of substance and achievement, someone who created things they admired, someone worth knowing. As we gathered in the lobby, Margaret finally approached me directly. "I didn't know," she said stiffly. "About the restaurants, about all this." I met her gaze evenly. "There are many things you don't know about me, Margaret. Perhaps it's time that changed." Whether that was a peace offering or a challenge, even I wasn't entirely sure. But as I walked to my car that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth was finally out, and whatever happened next, it would be based on reality rather than misconception and manipulation. The days following the restaurant revelation passed in tense silence. No calls from Thomas, no texts from Margaret, not even the usual weekend video chat with the grandchildren. I hadn't expected immediate reconciliation, but the complete radio silence was concerning. Had I miscalculated? Had my moment of triumph driven an even deeper wedge between us? On Wednesday evening, Nearly 4 days after the anniversary dinner, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Thomas standing on my porch alone, looking exhausted and uncertain. "Can I come in?" he asked, as if there was any possibility I would refuse my only child. I stepped back to let him enter, leading him to the kitchen where I had just brewed a pot of coffee. The kitchen had always been our place for important conversations dating back to his teenage years when he'd sit at the counter doing homework while I prepared dinner. We sat across from each other, steam rising from our mugs, neither quite ready to begin. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me? About the restaurants, about how successful you'd become?" I considered my answer carefully. "When did you stop asking, Thomas? When did conversations about my life become something to get through quickly, before changing the subject?" He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I deserve that," he admitted. "I haven't been the son you raised me to be." "No, you haven't," I agreed, not willing to soften this moment with platitudes. "I watched you stand by while Margaret gradually pushed me out of your lives. I watched you make excuses for inexcusable behavior. I watched you forget who I am and what I mean to you." His eyes filled with tears, something I hadn't seen since Frank's funeral. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't even know how it happened. It was easier to go along to avoid conflict, and somewhere along the way I lost sight of what's important." In that moment, I saw my son, clearly the good man I'd raised, who had temporarily lost his way, who had made the mistake of choosing peace over principle. I saw, too, that he was genuinely remorseful, not just because of my newly revealed status, but because he recognized his own failure. "What happens now?" he asked, looking younger, and more vulnerable than a man in his 40s had any right to. "That depends," I said. "I'm not interested in a relationship based on guilt or obligation. I'm not interested in being included only because you're afraid I'll cut you off financially, which, for the record, has never crossed my mind. I'm interested in genuine connection with my son and my grandchildren. I'm interested in respect, not deference." Thomas nodded slowly. "Margaret's struggling with all this," he admitted. "Finding out that you've been so successful that the restaurants we've been going to for years are yours. It challenges her view of herself and her place in the family." I felt a flash of irritation. I'm not responsible for Margaret's ego or her insecurities. Whatever issues she has with successful women or controlling family narratives, that's for her to work through. What I'm concerned about is behavior, not feelings. To his credit, Thomas didn't defend her further. "You're right. Whatever she's feeling, how she's acted toward you has been wrong. I should have stopped it long ago." We talked for hours that night, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. Thomas shared his frustrations with his marriage, his concerns about Margaret's controlling tendencies affecting the children, his own sense of being caught between loyalties. I shared my hurt at being systematically excluded, my loneliness after losing Frank, my pride in building something substantial that honored his memory. By the time he left well past midnight, we had reached an understanding. Thomas would stand firm on my inclusion in family events. He would bring the children to visit regularly with or without Margaret, and he would no longer tolerate disrespect toward me, veiled or otherwise. What we hadn't resolved was how Margaret fit into this new reality. That answer came 2 days later when she appeared at my door, uninvited and clearly uncomfortable. "May I come in?" she asked stiffly. I led her to the living room rather than the kitchen. Some conversations deserved more formal settings. She sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. "I want to apologize," she began, her words sounding rehearsed. "I didn't understand your position or your resources. If I'd known about the restaurants, I would have—" I held up a hand to stop her. "If you'd known I was wealthy and influential, you'd have treated me differently. That's not an apology, Margaret. That's an admission that you value status over character." She flushed, her composure slipping. "What do you want from me? You've already turned Thomas against me, impressed my parents, and made me look like a fool in front of my entire family." "I want what I've always wanted," I said calmly. "To be treated with basic respect and included in my family's life. To have a relationship with my grandchildren. To not be an afterthought or an inconvenience." Margaret looked genuinely perplexed, as if the concept of treating me well without external incentive was foreign to her. "We have different ideas about family," she said finally. "Different traditions, different expectations." "Then perhaps it's time we found a compromise that respects both," I suggested. "I'm not trying to take over your family, Margaret. I'm simply asking for my place in it to be acknowledged and valued." She didn't promise immediate change. I didn't expect her to, but she did agree to weekly family dinners at my house and to include me in future holiday plans. It wasn't a heartfelt reconciliation, but it was a start. Thomas took a more active role in the following weeks, calling me regularly and bringing the children over without Margaret when she was busy. During one such visit, he confessed that my revelation had forced him to reevaluate many aspects of his marriage. "I let her make too many decisions, because it was easier," he admitted, as we watched the children playing in the backyard. "I thought keeping peace was the most important thing, but I'm starting to see that peace at any price isn't peace at all." I could have told him that years ago, but some lessons need to be learned firsthand. Instead, I simply said, "You're their father, Thomas. Your voice matters in their lives." Meanwhile, Margaret's parents reached out independently, inviting me to lunch, where they expressed admiration for what I'd built, and in a roundabout way apologized for their daughter's behavior. Diana, in particular, seemed determined to establish a relationship separate from our children's marriage. "I'm afraid Margaret inherited her father's stubborn pride," she confided during our second lunch. "She's always needed to be the most accomplished person in the room. Finding out about your success was challenging for her self-image." I appreciated the insight, even if it didn't excuse the behavior. Understanding Margaret's insecurities helped me navigate our still fragile truce with more patience than I might otherwise have managed. The most profound change came in my relationship with the grandchildren. Freed from Margaret's filtering of information about me, they were fascinated by their suddenly interesting grandmother who owned restaurants. Jason begged to see the kitchens, and I arranged a special tour where he could make pizza with the chefs. Lily, at 6, was more interested in the business side, solemnly asking how many people worked for me and if girls could be bosses too. For the first time in years, I felt seen within my own family, not just as a grandmother who brought presents and minded her manners, but as a complete person with accomplishments, opinions, and value. Margaret remained the wild card in our family equation. Sometimes she participated in our gatherings with grudging civility. Other times she found excuses to be absent. Her behavior fluctuated between artificial warmth when others were watching and cold efficiency when they weren't. I had no illusions that she had fundamentally changed, or that she and I would ever be close. But the open hostility had ceased, and for now, that was enough. The balance of power had shifted, and we all knew it. Whether Margaret accepted that gracefully or not was her choice, but it would no longer affect my place in the family. 6 months after the revelation at Riverside Kitchen, our family gathered at my house for a Sunday dinner that had become our new tradition. Thomas was grilling in the backyard, the children were helping me prepare dessert, and even Margaret was participating, setting the table with an efficiency that, while not warm, was at least respectful. Looking around at this scene of domestic normality, I marveled at how much had changed. The painful exclusion that had once characterized my relationship with my son's family had given way to regular, meaningful connection. The grandchildren now called me several times a week, eager to share school achievements or simply chat. Thomas had reclaimed his role as my son, not just Margaret's husband calling me for advice or stopping by for coffee when he was in the neighborhood. Margaret remained the least changed element in our family dynamic. She had adapted to the new reality with pragmatism rather than enthusiasm, recognizing that her position depended on at least outward acceptance of my place in the family. Her behavior improved through necessity rather than genuine change of heart, but I had made my peace with that limitation. What mattered more was that Thomas had found his voice again. He no longer allowed Margaret to make unilateral decisions about family matters. When she suggested skipping my birthday dinner for a work event, he firmly overruled her. When she complained about the children spending too much time with me, he reminded her that a grandmother's influence was irreplaceable. "I don't love her any less," he confided during one of our private conversations. "But I see her more clearly now, both her strengths and her weaknesses. And I understand that loving someone doesn't mean giving them complete control over your life or your relationships." This new awareness extended to his parenting as well. He made a point of telling the children stories about their grandfather and about his own childhood, ensuring that my history with them wasn't erased from the family narrative. He brought them to the original hometown kitchen location, showing them where he had taken his first steps and learned to count change. The children flourished under this more balanced family structure. Jason, once shy around me, now proudly told his friends that his grandmother was a restaurant owner. Lily had taken to following me around with a notebook, writing down things I said about business that she found important. My favorite moment was overhearing her tell a playdate. My grandma says that quality and consistency are the foundations of success. I plan to be just like her someday. As for me, I made changes too. I had kept my business success separate from my personal life for so long that integration felt strange at first. I had to learn to talk about my accomplishments without feeling like I was bragging to accept compliments, without deflection to bring my whole self to family gatherings, rather than just the grandmother portion of my identity. I also became more deliberate about my legacy. I established college funds for Jason and Lily, ensuring their education would be secure, regardless of future family dynamics. But I was careful to balance financial generosity with values education. When they visited the restaurants, they bussed tables alongside the staff and learned the importance of treating every worker with respect. My relationship with money became more transparent as well. I updated my modest home not to impress Margaret, but because I deserved comfort. I replaced my reliable but aging car with a newer model that was safer and more enjoyable to drive. Small indulgences that I had previously denied myself became part of my life, not as statements of wealth, but as acknowledgments of my hard work. At the 6-month mark, we held a special dinner at the original hometown kitchen location to celebrate the anniversary of Frank's and my first restaurant opening. The entire family attended, including Margaret's parents, who had become unexpected allies in my reintegration into family life. As we gathered around tables where Thomas had once done homework and Frank had cooked countless meals, I looked at the faces of my family and felt a sense of completion that had been missing for years. The journey had been painful at times, requiring me to stand firm when it would have been easier to retreat. But the rewards, our renewed family bonds, the children's admiration, Thomas' renewed strength, made every difficult moment worthwhile. Margaret watched me throughout the evening with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Not hostility exactly, but something more complex. When the desserts had been served, and the conversation had broken into smaller groups, she approached me directly. "I still don't understand why you kept it secret for so long," she said, gesturing around at the restaurant. "All this success. You could have said something years ago." I considered my answer carefully. "Would it have changed how you saw me?" I asked. "Would you have valued me more as a person if you'd known I was successful in business?" She had the grace to look uncomfortable. Probably, she admitted with surprising honesty. "Success matters in my family. It's how we measure worth." "And that's the difference between us," I said, not unkindly. "I believe worth comes from who you are, not what you own or achieve. I'd have hoped for your respect, whether I owned 32 restaurants or none at all." She nodded slowly, not agreeing exactly, but at least considering the perspective. "I'm trying," she said finally. "For Thomas and the kids. I'm trying to see things differently." It wasn't a transformation or even a true reconciliation. But it was an acknowledgement that change was necessary, and for now, that was enough. Later that evening, as Thomas drove me home, he asked a question that caught me by surprise. "Are you happy, Mom, with how things are now?" I thought about the journey of the past year, from isolation to confrontation to this new, imperfect but honest family dynamic. "I'm content," I told him. "I've learned that happiness isn't about perfect circumstances, but about authentic connections. For too long, I accepted a shadow version of family rather than demanding the real thing. I'm not making that mistake again." He reached across to squeeze my hand. "Neither am I." And that perhaps was the most important lesson of all. At 68, I had finally learned that standing in your truth, however uncomfortable it might make others, is the only path to genuine connection. That self-respect must precede respect from others. That it's never too late to reclaim your place at the table, literally and figuratively. As I watch my grandchildren grow, I hope they learn this lesson earlier than I did. I hope they understand that their worth isn't determined by others' perceptions, that real love doesn't require diminishing yourself, and that sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful relationships. Life has taught me that family is both a gift and a responsibility. It requires nurturing boundaries, honesty, and sometimes difficult confrontations. But when built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care, it can weather even the most challenging storms. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family members who undervalued you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your place at the table of your own life. Thank you for listening, and until next time, value yourself first, and the right people will follow.